This is Matt Coyne, host of The Cheap Seats. Thank you for listening to the following broadcast here on Public House Media.
Smile Brilliant believes everyone deserves the chance to have professionally whitened teeth. Thanks to them, I've had the opportunity to whiten my teeth and have seen drastic results over a very short period of time for a lot less money than I'd pay at the dentist. To try out your whitening trays with Smile Brilliant, head to smilebrilliant.com and use the code Tiana for $20 off your order.
This is Rachel Mullins, host of #NoFilterFriday here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my new show, #NoFilterFriday, where we talk about all of the sexual misconduct allegations swirling around Hollywood. A new show drops every Friday at 8:30 Pacific Standard Time. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you'll never miss an episode of #NoFilterFriday. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
The strongest people are not those who show strength in front of the world, but those who fight and win battles that others do not know anything about. Jonathan Harnish. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the Refined Redhead podcast. I'm your host, Tiana Vanderhei, and I apologize for my raspy voice. I am trying to overcome the excessive amounts of pollen in our lovely state of Wisconsin. Lost my voice on Sunday and have been a little raspy, so I also apologize for the delayed drop of episode 2, but I had to make sure that I could talk. So if you're wondering why I sound a little hoarse, I'm still recovering from all of this, but I wanted to ensure we got this episode in. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen. If you haven't subscribed already, be sure to subscribe to The Refined Redhead podcast on iTunes Podcast and Google Play to stay up to date on every bi-weekly show coming out every other Tuesday. As some of you may know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, which has been observed in the U.S. since 1949, allowing that message and the stigma to be reduced, trying to reach millions of people through use of media, local events, and screenings and different platforms. And I alluded to this in my first episode. I talked about my own struggles in college and kind of finding my calling in my career, but we all inevitably encounter some type of mental health struggle at some point in our lives. And it's important that we have a broader perspective and refinement on those issues, and that not only can we help ourselves, but we can help other people when they need our assistance. So I'm very excited for my very first guest for my podcast to be talking with one of my best friends, Olivia Mercer. Everyone, welcome, Olivia. Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I alluded to the fact that I'm kind of getting over sinus allergy stuff right now, so I'm a little raspy, but I have some hot tea next to me, so hopefully that will help. Now, you're probably wondering why we're talking to Olivia, and I just call her Liv, unless I'm trying to get her attention, but she has professionalism and background in mental health, and I want her to speak to that. So, Liv, tell us about your educational path and what you're doing right now. What led you there?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting, but if you were to ask me probably about 10 to 15 years ago what I saw myself doing, I would have told you I would be a journalist for the New York Times. I always wanted to be a writer, and then as I got going and just some different turns and turbulations in my own life, I remember my mom suggesting to me at one point, offering me the feedback, hey, Liv, you're really good at just listening and giving advice and being empathic with the people around you. Have you ever thought about pursuing psychology and counseling? And that made a light bulb go off in my head, and sure enough, I took a advanced placement psychology course my senior year of high school and was just enthralled by the material, and it's all said and done from there. So I pursued my bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse and graduated in 2013. And then I started my master's degree. So I got a master's of science in mental health counseling from Viterbo University, and I graduated just this past May of 2017. From there, I've worked, a handful of different experiences through being a behavior therapist for children with autism. I've also worked with local school districts, and then was a career counselor with Viterbo University, as well as received my internship experience from UW La Crosse as well. And all of that has really been well focused on counseling, and ultimately led me to accepting my current position as one of the mental health counselors at the Big Ten University, Indiana University, down here in Bloomington. So I currently get to serve the college student population and really work with a number of students in a variety of different mental health concerns, and it's been really gratifying, wonderful work.
I want to go back to one of the topics you said there, and wow, that's a lot. Obviously, I know your background, but hearing it all kind of spewed out like that puts it in a different perspective. Let's talk first about children. You talked about the autism spectrum, specifically children in schools. How do we focus on mental health issues at that young age when we can do a lot to counteract them and help them when they are so vulnerable and influential?
Well, what I think is really important, and some of this, just to put a disclaimer out, is going to be uncomfortable, because when we talk about mental health, what's really important to think about is our personal language. What type of language are we using with the students, with children, with one another, with our peers, with our parents, with our spouses? What language are we using, and what message might that be sending to them about feelings, about emotions, about mental health? So often we tell children, no, it's okay, stop crying, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. But the message that could be sending to a child is, it's not okay to cry, you're being sensitive. It can send some pretty impactful messages about what that emotion or that emotional reaction might be doing and how that might be received. So it's really first and foremost important that you think to yourself, what types of language am I using with the students? Could I be maybe sending mixed messages about mental health and about emotion in general, and that we really are starting to offer supportive and empathic presences for these students, because for a lot of people, it's a multi-systematic situation. So we also have to think about what is their home life like, and perhaps the teachers are really the most stable environment that they have, and can we really offer that and foster that type of support, and then perhaps work with the children on ensuring that they feel well supported and that they can recognize from there ways to ask for help from their teachers and maybe from their classmates as well.
And as a teacher or an adult, there's that raspy voice coming out. What initial signs can you look for? I mean, you might say kids are kids, they're going to act up, they're going to have those type of responses to situations, but are there different mechanisms that an adult should look for where they know that may be a warning sign that something else is going on?
Oh, absolutely. And, the important thing is to also know everybody's an individual. The more that teachers get to know their students, they're going to understand their quirks and what may be in line or out of line with character. And I think that's the most important thing to note is, how does this child typically respond? And are they perhaps having an emotional reaction that you would deem a bit uncharacteristic for them? I think it's important to really recognize the way in which they're interacting with other peers. Are they isolating themselves? Also hygienically, how are they behaving? Are they coming to school and appearing to be a bit more disheveled? Are they taking care of themselves a little bit less? Are they not dressed for the cold winter months that Wisconsin or any Midwestern states bring? Are they seeming a lot more lethargic, a lot more tired? Are they acting out? Are they a bit more irritable? And is that really out of line in terms of their character? And also just some anxiety symptoms. Anxiety can really show up in physical symptoms as well. Are they appearing shaky? Are they having some more anxious response patterns, asking for a lot of clarity, really overly being apologetic? And again, just asking yourself, is this in line with the character of this child? Because there might be some kids out there who are a bit more apologetic, but when it starts becoming out of line of their character and potentially becoming detrimental for the way that they're behaving, or making it difficult for them to complete simple tasks or really pay attention in school, that's when it might start crossing that line.
Let's switch the topic now and the focus to adults. Now, roughly 1 in 5 adults, according to NAMI, in the US experience some type of mental health challenge in a given year. That amounts to more than 43 million. That's a staggering number. And yet we still have a tendency to try to brush mental health issues under the rug as though they're not happening. So as an adult and as someone in this career that focuses on adults on a college campus, what's your advice to individuals that are coping with something themselves?
Well, I think first and foremost, you do bring up a great point that mental health is still severely stigmatized. And while I think every single day we're gaining ground to move away from that, you still hear plenty of language about, oh, there are people out there who have it worse than you, or you'll get through this, tomorrow's another day, and don't realize that those types of statements can feel incredibly deafening and isolating and invalidating towards somebody who is struggling with something related to mental health. And what I think is really important for anybody out there to realize that, first and foremost, you're not alone. While that is a staggering number, I hope that there's some validation in the fact that you could look at a crowd and there's probably somebody out there and many people out there who are struggling with something similar as you are, whether that be anxiety. And we're not just talking about an actual anxiety disorder, but an anxious response to a pretty significant stressor in your life. Also depression, whether that's major depressive disorder, unspecified depression, or really just a depressive reaction. People go through things all the time. And you're not alone in that experience, and that there are plenty of people out there willing to support you and to create that supportive environment to really help you learn to foster that acceptance and ultimately work through that to whether or not that's finding clarity, if that's finding symptom relief, or whatever you're really needing in terms of that experience. Because ultimately the overwhelming conversation is about getting better, and that's just creating the type of statement that there's something to fix about us, when it might be more so in terms of learning how to work with our anxiety and accepting that it's going to be a part of our experience.
And I think that's pretty common. I know when I was struggling in school and felt very depressed, I wanted to isolate myself. And there's times when I go through spurts of feeling extremely anxious, and essential oils help that. Deep breathing and focusing on something else helps that, but I want to isolate myself. So knowing that you're not alone and that you have people to confide in obviously helps so much in that situation.
Oh, absolutely. And, Tia, you bring up a great point. I always encourage my clients whenever they're like, yeah, I'm anxious or I'm feeling really depressed, I don't know what's going on. 9 times out of 10, we actually don't know what's going on, because what can be really difficult is looking inward and really playing what I like to say detective on ourselves. So really asking yourself the question, when I feel sad or irritable or anxious, how am I behaving? And in what way is my behavior maybe sustaining my experience? Because oftentimes when we're feeling sad, we isolate ourselves, just like you did, Tia. When in actuality, what we're typically needing is that social connectedness. We're not really asking ourselves the question, what is my sadness, my irritability, my anxiety telling me I'm needing? And am I behaving in a certain way or coping in a certain way that's actually not beneficial for me? And what would be something else that feels more beneficial and is more in line with my values and can help me create more of an enriching and meaningful life? And that's not to suggest that time alone is not beneficial. There are going to be plenty of people out there who recognize that that's an important coping strategy for them. But we really need to look inward and determine what do I need and what maybe am I not doing, and how is that sustaining what I'm experiencing right now?
Everyone needs a little me time. Typically that's, for me, a bubble bath and a glass of wine and maybe a book, which I know you love a good book yourself, and you typically, when talking to people who are struggling with something, have recommendations of a book to read. So what are maybe some of those top options in terms of mental health that you have shared with others that they should read?
Oh my gosh, plenty. Right now, and this is in line with mental health, but a little bit different. Right now, the hot book that I'm reading, in fact, the vast majority of my department is reading, because we've all just kind of had an impromptu book club get started for the summer, is this book called Attached. And it's actually about adult attachment patterns, because I've found a lot in line with my work and dealing with college students especially, is that a big part of our experience is wanting to create interpersonal relationships, and more specifically romantic relationships. And there's so many people coming to me saying, I don't get it, I'm behaving in a way that's unlike me, I'm really anxious, or I'm avoiding this, what's going on? And I love this book, Attached. You can buy it for like $12 on Amazon, because it does an awesome job normalizing and validating, hey, here's your attachment pattern, this is probably why it came up. And a lot of times, as much as we think that it probably came up because of our relationship with our parent or somebody else, it sometimes comes up as a series of bad relationships, and we've all had some difficult ones in high school, and it can really tell you what to do with it, because a lot of times when we respond that way, it can be really disruptive to our identity, really disruptive to our emotional reactions. So I love that book. I'm trying to think of a few others. Another book I really like, and it's not a clinical book, but it offers more of a faith-based perspective. It's actually called Present Over Perfect. It's written from this woman's perspective and really trying to slow life down. Because as a millennial and as somebody in my generation, I'm always focused personally, and notice also in terms of my clinical work, we're always focused on the next best thing. Okay, great, I accomplished that. What's next? And we forget just to slow down and pay attention and wait, and really are missing out on the beauty of our everyday experience. Nine times out of 10, I wake up in the morning and go, okay, I just got to get to 4:30 when I can be back home in bed or going for a run or doing whatever next I need to do. And when I'm on a run, all I'm thinking is, okay, I've got to get through these next 45 minutes and then I'm done. I'm not paying attention to what my experience is actually like and actually engaging in the enjoyment of that. And I love the book, and for anybody who's really in touch with their faith and with their religion, it does a really great job of tying that in, but it also ties it in a way that's not so abrasive for those of us out there who maybe are a little bit less in line with our religious or spiritual sense of self. So I love both of those books. And I probably have about 1,010,000 other suggestions, but I'll save you all from that.
I may pry you for some of those other ones, and I will share those on the Refined Redhead Facebook page if any of you are interested in some follow-up with that. But I do also want to ask you, we talked about looking for signs in ourselves and realizing that you're not alone if you're struggling with some type of mental health issue, but how can you help others if you have a friend or a coworker or a family member that is overcoming something? What's the verbiage you should use in terms of your nonverbal communication as well? And really, what can you do to be a confidant for them?
Absolutely. And again, it brings me back to one of the first things I said is asking yourself, what's your go-to language? When somebody's struggling, when you notice somebody's crying, what are you wanting to say? Are you wanting to say, oh, it's okay, you're going to get through this? Are you wanting to say, oh, don't cry, don't cry? What is your language? Because a lot of times we comfort in a very solution-focused way. And more often than not, when you ask somebody who's depressed or anxious or whatever their experience is, that's usually not what they're needing. They're usually just needing somebody to be there and offer support. They're sometimes just needing you to say, wow, that's really sad. Offer statements of validation. That sucks, Tia. That really sounds like that was a difficult day for you, versus, hey, let's find all the positive. Because sometimes we just need to feel validated. So it's really important that you work to validate the person in your life in whatever they're experiencing. Even if it feels a little bit petty, even if you're having a reaction, work to validate that person. It's also important, and this is often the step that we miss, is asking the question, what are you needing right now? Because we, more often than not, again, act from this very fixer standpoint. And I even find that out of myself in terms of my counselor perspective, and just slowing down and saying, this is really difficult for you. How can I help you through this? What are you needing from me right now? And letting them share with you. It takes all of the guesswork out so you're not having to fish for really that perfect response to say, because at the end of the day, there's not a perfect response. It's about just being there for that person. It's about offering that validation and knowing that they can turn to you. And they need to be able to see that from that nonverbal behavior, showing people your active listening skills, really looking at them. If that person appreciates having their hand held, that you're reaching out and holding that person's hand. Because at the end of the day, it's about what that person's needing and really being able to focus that attention on that.
Now, I said that Liv and I are very good friends. And when I say good friends, we also lived together for over a year. And obviously, when you're spending that much time with someone, you kind of pick up on some of their social cues. I use the term validated so much in talking to friends and like expressing my own emotions, because I know as a stubborn, sassy redhead that from a very young age, I've tend to internalize my feelings and my emotions. And I've struggled with releasing that. And ultimately, I know when I was younger, I would harness all of those until I hit my breaking point. And then it was like little Ginge on a rage. There was no holding me back. But talking to others and having deep, meaningful conversations, I find myself saying, your feelings are validated. That's completely legitimate for you to be feeling that way. So maybe I have my own counselor perspective there going on. I don't know.
You do. You use great language.
I try my best. So in terms of Mental Health Awareness Month and being more refined in our viewpoints of mental health issues, is there anything that I'm missing that you'd like to touch on?
No, again, I think it's just important for everybody out there to ask themselves the question, how do I view mental health? Because it's really easy for us to say, go see a counselor, it's in pushing counseling and really pushing mental health awareness, but then when it happens to us, it can feel like an identity crisis. And there are so many people who walk through my door saying, I tell everybody to go to counseling, but it's taken me 9 months, it's taken me a year, it's taken me all of my college experience to walk through this door. And asking yourself that question, if this comes up for me, how would I want to be treated? How do I truly view mental health if it were to happen to me, if it were to happen to somebody close to me? And then how can I maybe use that knowledge to change the way that I'm interacting with other people? Because I can tell you, when I become a counselor, it has taken my ability to judge anybody away. Like, if I go through a drive-through and I have somebody who's a little bit short or maybe passive-aggressive with me, I'm finding myself complaining about that a lot less and asking myself, well, what could be that person's struggle? Is this person experiencing something? How did I add to that person's day? Did I create any more terms of difficulty? And the more that you're aware of yourself and your tendencies, the more it's going to change your ability to interact with other people. And that can just make such a huge difference in terms of the way that it could be affecting somebody else.
Absolutely. I always say you never know what battles other people are going through, and to be mindful of that. I tried to keep that in mind when I worked as a waitress for years, whether that was from my own perspective, coming from class, and if something had happened. I remember one day I got the news of a close family member passing away, and I bawled all afternoon, but had to go into work that night. And I knew I probably looked like I had been crying, but it was a dim lit work environment. I put makeup on, I pushed through, and one of my guests at one point said, "Are you okay?" And I broke down crying as I'm trying to take their order. And it was in that moment that I appreciated how much they realized, yes, I'm your server, but I am human. And there's something going on internally in my personal life. And it was very difficult to be at work in that moment. And I sincerely appreciated them seeing that. So thank you, Liv, for taking the time to be a guest on the Refined Redhead podcast. I appreciate your perspective when helping others and helping me when I've struggled with self. I know when I have an issue, I have to text her or call her and talk things through. And then she gives me the whole, your feelings are valid. Let's talk through this. But everyone needs to know, bottom line, that they're not alone, that they can get through whatever obstacle they're facing. And I also have to touch on the fact that I appreciate you changed your career path, which is something that's an ongoing message in my podcast and my personal life as well. Struggling with college and deriving my platform for pageants from that is that things don't always work out the way you think they're going to, and that's the beauty of life.
Absolutely. And I mean, thank you so much. I feel very honored and very blessed that I got to be your very first guest on your incredible podcast. But, everything that you touched on, your career path is always going to change, and trying to create that type of dialogue that fosters for that change and empowers that change and makes people feel like they can do that. Because even if you've known, like from the get-go, from my freshman year of college, I knew I wanted to be a counselor and I wanted to work in the field of mental health. But the type of counselor I wanted to be has drastically shifted from that that point to when I was a senior in college to my very first year in my master's degree. And it truly wasn't until about a year and a half ago that I could firmly say, yes, I want to work with college students and work in the college student population. And making those changes is okay. And we really want to try and foster that type of line of support. Because that ties into mental health and that ties into your experience entirely. And I'm just so excited that you're creating such positive dialogue around that, because I think it's going to be so empowering for every generation to really hear that and hear that success can come out of change as well.
That's the key line there. Success can come out of change, and what a diamond only gets its shine after going through struggles and the rough points and pressure. It has to endure the pressure, but you can get through it. So thanks again, Liv. I sincerely appreciate you taking your time to chat with us. And again, to all of you listening at home, if you aren't already, be sure to subscribe to the Refined Redhead podcast by searching iTunes podcast and or Google Play. Time to leave you with a little inspirational quote to round out episode 2 of the Refined Redhead podcast. Never forget how far you've come, everything you have gotten through, all the times you have pushed on, even when you felt as though you couldn't, all the mornings you got out of bed no matter how hard it was, all the times you wanted to give up, but you never did. You got through it one day at a time. Never forget how much strength you have learned and developed.